Hello, Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, in one story, the city owes plenty money. In the other story, significant money is owed to the city. In neither story is there money flowing. We'll look tonight at traffic cameras and a report concluding that many drivers have been illegally fined. Meanwhile, the city's cost burden for overseeing the Hard Rock site grows, though the developer has yet to contribute. We'll also look at an assessment of the city's economic future, and our Future Watch segment probes a Magazine Street construction project that was supposed to be completed in 2017. Plus, we'll take a special look at New Orleans' links to Cuba, including the music as well as the red tape to getting there. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Jessica Williams, reporter, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter, and Eric Paulson, anchor and reporter for WWL-TV, Channel 4. We go over to Jessica first, because the bills for Hard Rock, the collapse of the hotel, just keep growing as far in the city's end, and I'm sure the private end too. But as far as the city is concerned, they've been putting out money for the safety details out there.
They have. They've spent so far about $11.7 million, and that money is something that the developers have been supposed to pay or said that they were going to pay, but haven't so far. And that's all related to the October 12th collapse where 3 died and dozens more were injured. We're looking at repairs to North Rampart Street right after the collapse at a cost of $1.2 million. We're looking at $850,000 to cover damage to street lights and light poles and streetcars. We're looking at another $750,000 to fix the roof on the Sanger that was damaged when the top floors of the building tumbled to the ground. The Regional Transit Authority has also been inconvenienced. It had its transit hub, basically the meeting spot where you could go and catch a majority of the buses in the city, had to be rerouted, and they lost ridership as a result. And so there's a long line of people waiting to be reimbursed because of this incident. And really the first step in the process is that the city has to put in claims with the developer's insurance company. And then after that, they can then seek voluntary compliance. And then of course the final step is to sue.
So in the beginning though, when it first happened, am I right in this, that the developers actually contract with the city for off-duty police and fire?
Yes.
To be there on site, and that is a separate bill that is outstanding.
That's a separate $927,000 bill, and that's for public safety at the site, and then another $2.2 million just for personnel that they had to pay in the immediate follow-up after the disaster to monitor the site and to get folks away, and then also just the time and the energy that they spent in costs for fixing the surrounding area, and also cost loss as other personnel that would have been doing other things had to be redirected to this disaster.
So for that direct contracting, is that something that the city could invoice for and sort of claim right now for the labor cost for police and fire?
The city has insisted that all of its claims have to go through insurance. They've said that they put in claims with the insurance company, and then shortly after that they would move towards seeking voluntary payout, and then shortly after that the final step would be to sue.
Well, determining who to sue and who's is really part of the whole what's going to be several months long situation of determining who's at fault there.
And it's been interesting because the developers have since been at odds among themselves over which one of them is the most liable. A recent radio show, they got on and basically tried to distance themselves from the project by saying, well, we're the owner, but we're not necessarily the developer. Well,
They're
the
all
owner
looking
group,
for somebody else
owner group is comprised of the developing group, and it's the same group of people, but they're sort of looking, the person who did the electricity on the building is looking to say, well, not me. The person who did the structure and designing it is saying, no, it wasn't me either. And so they're kind of all playing the blame game with each other.
And that's it. They all want to blame somebody else. They want to make sure it's not them.
Nobody wants it to lie with them.
Nope.
Well, that's where the lawsuits are going to come in, and then certainly the reports, OSHA report is due in April, which can at least maybe give us a preliminary thought for the cause and who might be at fault with this. But didn't the attorney for the developer also in that interview, and that was with Newell Norman on WWL radio about a week and a half ago, he said that Hard Rock is paying, or not Hard Rock, I should say, the developers are paying for the security at the hotel.
And
they
the
are
city
paying
specifically said at the most recent city council meeting that that is not true. The city said they have not received a dime from the developers, and the statement that was put out by the Kerry Miller, who is representing the developers on the Hard Rock, was incorrect. There hasn't been any money that's been remitted. The city is very much interested in recouping that money because at the same time that it's dealing with the Hard Rock, it is also grappling with the cost of a cyber attack that cost it another $7 million. And this is money that they've had to pull from surplus, from their, looking at the fund balance, but they can't continue to weather the cost of these incidents without getting any reimbursements, particularly as we look into hurricane season for this year.
I think the developer did say that they, issued a statement or something. At any rate, they responded saying he meant for the private security that they now have since contracted with, not necessarily with the city, that is who's been paid. So, I mean, this is going to play out over a long time. It's going to play out in the courts. Like you said, people are pointing fingers.
You still have to wonder what's going to happen when they implode that building.
How much other collateral
yeah.
damage there will be too.
I mean, it's not like you're imploding a building on hard rock. This is kind of mush, and I don't know. I'm not an engineer clearly, but first it was where they're going to implode it. Then it was too dangerous to implode it. Now they're imploding it.
Exactly.
And you kind of wonder what's going to happen.
Multiple times.
It's in the middle.
As far as how they're going to
It's on the
bring it
edge of
in.
the French Quarter.
City.
Yeah.
Well, not too far away, there was an implosion a few years ago. The building, remember with the Claiborne Towers?
Sure.
And with Delta Towers, and that wasn't that far away. And as I recall, that went successfully. That
wasn't on the edge of
As
a
densely
historic
packed
district.
in.
Yeah. I mean, the French Quarter is a lot different than where they blew it up on Canal. It was on the other side of the interstate.
And that's also been a point of contention because the city has said that it has to also demolish the 3 buildings surrounding the Hard Rock, and there's a concern about, well, what about the historic value of those?
Right. Well, that was the request of the owners of the building, who happened to be in 1031 Canal Development Corporation. So Cantrell has said, yeah, those buildings are coming down. I haven't heard any more of that otherwise. But okay, well, we'll be talking about this one for a while, but the city needs some money is basically the bottom line.
Definitely,
Okay.
definitely.
All righty. And talking about the city, and economic assessment, actually, it's looking kind of bright for the city.
Well, yes and no. There was a big gathering today, the annual meeting of Greater New Orleans Inc., which we used to know as being the Chamber of Commerce for the regional. And there were about 3,000 people there, including all of the parish presidents of the surrounding area. So it's sort of like the annual get together. And Michael Hecht, who's the executive director, is like the ringleader and the top spokesman of this. And there was just such a flow of information that I had some bits and pieces of information. But I think the feeling is that that we all know the wonderful things about our area, but that the feeling is that we could do better. As someone mentioned, sometimes we see these economic studies and that we're content at looking at the bottom and just being sure that Mississippi is still underneath us, and that we're 49, not 50, and people said we should be looking to be 1 and 2, and in some ways we are. But they talked about different categories and ways that we can grow. One thing somebody mentioned, and it got applause, was that we should be paying top-level salaries. And
That was Guy Williams said that.
It was Guy Williams, yeah, who is the incoming chairman of that. Okay, and that got he's with Gulf Coast Bank, and that got a good applause, which surprised me because a lot of the people doing the clapping are people who do payrolls. But he says, just across the board, if we want to attract people, and if we want to do things, we just have to do them better. And they said that all the university presidents are in their communication on committees, and one thing that they all agree with is that this area is doing good at producing jobs, but they're not producing them fast enough, and so we're just losing people. And so industry just needs to step it up in terms of getting people. One industry, they talked about a lot of different industries, but one that's a perennial topic is the music industry. And someone was saying that, in music, we're a good concert town, great concert town, like almost like #1 in the nation in terms of live music coming here. But the problem has always been as far as having a musical infrastructure and a musical production town. Now, that argument has been around for a long time. People look at Nashville and what Nashville did, how it created a recording industry. Country music didn't come to Nashville. Nashville created an industry that made it attractive for country music. And there have been a lot of efforts in the past to do that. Bring in the legal people and the production people. And we have some small studios in the area, but we really don't have the technology. And maybe now we have the people that can do it. In the past, it maybe wasn't the right crowd, but there's a real effort at doing that, an effort at doing more with food. I mean, not just restaurants, but food production and things that we can do. So there's a lot of incentives out there.
And tech, though, supposedly is a bright spot. That New Orleans is
That's been
up
for a
there
long
in
time.
new
though.
tech. Yeah,
And I
continues to be.
like Michael Eck's catch line for the music industry. He said, "Making music, make money."
Well,
And one thing I thought was just interesting,
Yes.
a little side effort is something called pro solo. And what they say is that there are a lot of professional athletes that come out of Louisiana. They all have a lot of money. And when they're finished in terms of their investing and all this, trying to get these people to invest more in Louisiana. An example they use is Marcus Colson, who used to play with the Saints, who's developing a sort of like a health drinking industry and trying to develop these people.
What's the name of it? Main Squeeze.
Main Squeeze.
Is it?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, let's grow that music business here. I mean, that's something that has been, that's been a focus
Oh,
for
we've talked about that for
decades. Yeah. Okay, Eric, come on, let's stick with you because you took a really wonderful trip to Cuba.
I did.
Along with some wonderful musicians talking about New Orleans
But
music.
Marcia, if you go over what I listened to you give your intro on all the problems that we're facing here, and I'm going, oh my God, it sounds more like Cuba than I thought. So, and there are a lot of similarities between Havana and New Orleans, culturally, musically, and even when you walk through Old Havana, it's kind of like walking through the French Quarter, which is
As
kind
a
of
matter
cool.
of fact, we can walk through Old Havana with
Yes,
a
we
bunch of
can.
musicians. Let's roll the tape right now. Eric, you had a couple of stories already about this, and you can see
It was pretty
you'll have a
amazing.
couple more coming up, right?
And Havana's never seen anything like this before. Tuba de Cuba came there a few years ago, and they did a second line through Old Havana. This was bigger, and it was just huge.
And we had a bunch of New Orleans musicians were there for a jazz festival, right? And then Trombone Shorty was there with kids from his foundation.
Yeah, so it was the Soul Rebels, Tank and the Bangas, Anders Osborne, Big Chief Monk Boudreaux, Trombone Shorty. I mean, it was a great lineup. It was just amazing.
So tell us about it. What was the feel of it all? And I know you had a good time.
Had a great time.
Yeah.
The first day we went to a school, and the Gia Prima Foundation and the Trombone Shorty Foundation were giving instruments to kids down in Cuba, which was wonderful. Then the Cuban kids and the New Orleans kids got together. These dancers were at a school, and they just happened to see the second line come by, and they jumped in and started dancing with everybody. It was kind of cool. So this second line was going to meet a conga line, and so we're going to have the
see that in
melding of the
just a minute.
cultures. But getting back to the school, and then Shorty gave lessons in trombone. Tank and the Bangas were giving lessons. The guys from Soul Rebels were giving lessons. It was really kind of neat.
And so it looks like everybody's having fun. I mean, how did the Cuban people respond to all of these Americans coming to visit?
They love having Americans down there, especially the musicians. There's a musician there named Sema Funk, and he is probably Cuba's hottest musician right now. And he came to Tipitina's, and that's where he got to meet the Soul Rebels and Trombone Shorty. And then a lot of this stuff was developing through that meeting. And he was explaining some of the difference in what the Cuban beat was on a drum and what the New Orleans beat was on a drum. And when they got together, we went to a little.
And we have New Orleans Indian too. That's what Charisse Harrison
Charisse.
Nelson.
She
right
does
there.
not call herself an Indian, though.
Huh?
She does not. She calls herself a Maroon.
Okay.
It's a long story.
All right. Well, there
But
she is.
Big Chief
and her-
Monk Boudreaux was there, and then
beautiful
this was
dress.
the New Orleans second line meeting the conga.
All right. Well, let's take a look at Eric again. The video, by the way, is just beautiful.
It was
really
beautiful,
is.
and you got to give hands down to Steve Wolfram, our
Yeah,
photographer,
Steve
did a great job.
Great job.
But in Cuba, it's an odd country because for so long we've looked at it as for all of our lives, it's always been embargoed,
Yeah.
and so it's been that kind of forbidden fruit for a long time, But when you get down there, there are parts that are in such bad disrepair. Other parts are just beautifully done. We went to a concert with Tank and the Bangas. They were headlining a show at the Fábrica de Artes Cubano, and it was rated by Time magazine as one of the top, coolest places in the world. It's new. They're trying to do a lot of entrepreneurship in Cuba, where they're changing some of the rules and making it a little more friendly for the Cuban people.
So, but how difficult is it to get there? I mean, Obama had sort of, he
eased
lessened
relations,
their restrictions. Yeah,
and then
he eased
President
relations,
Trump
but, yeah.
took those away. It's still fairly easy to get there. Tourism is banned. However, you can go under 12 categories. Journalism, arts, helping the Cuban people, religion. There's 12 categories you can go under. So, and I think the easiest way to explain it is you can go study the beach, you can't go lay on the beach. And that's the kind of weird thing. And credit cards are not accepted there, American credit cards. You can't use that, it's all cash.
And for $1, you're penalized.
You're penalized 13%. If you exchange euros or Canadian dollars, then they give you the face value. And it's a poor country. I mean, most Cubans work for the equivalent of around $20 a month. But they have subsidized housing, they have free health care, free education, free drugs, etc.
So, but by and large, if you decide to visit there, you have to go for a purpose, but you can still have a nice time.
You can, and just remember, you got to bring cash. Don't think about taking your. You can bring your cell phone, but phone service is spotty. The internet is probably the worst in the Americas. It's just it's a complicated, complex place.
So y'all are going to do a couple more pieces on this?
Yeah, next week on the morning news.
Okay.
In fact, we used to have Lucy Bustamante used to work for us. Her family is from Cuba. Lucy was born here, but the rest of her family was born in Cuba, and so even within her family, you can see the divide on how you feel about Lucy is from one generation and her parents from another, and there's a totally different feel of how you feel about Cuba and relations with Cuba.
Okay, interesting, Eric, and great video also. Great job, Steve. Okay, over to Miss Dawn now. Magazine Street, and a project that was supposed to be finished in 2017?
We talked about it
It's
in
not even started?
2016, I think, on this program, and all excited because roads were getting redone all over the place. It's still on the books. It hasn't started yet. We're talking about Magazine Street from Leake Avenue, which is roughly by the Army Corps of Engineers building, all the way to Nashville Avenue. So the whole path by the zoo, by Audubon Park, where tourists, visitors, and locals alike use it a lot. I drive it regularly, and I believe the speed limit is around 25 miles an hour. You cannot really safely go faster than about 15 right now because you can't get a ticket there. It is like driving through Beirut or maybe old parts of Cuba. I'm not sure.
Washboard Street.
It's just an absolute mess, and for it to be, as tourists come in to visit the zoo and Audubon Park and bounce across it, you just have to wonder. It's supposedly going to finally start happening this year. This is Future Watch. We're looking to the future. From Leake Avenue to East Drive, which is the road that comes down from the Audubon Park Fly on the downtown end. So Leake to East is the first part of the project, and then East to Nashville will be completed later. It's expected to begin late summer or fall of this year. It's a joint project between the City of New Orleans, Sewage and Water Board, and the Louisiana Department of Development and Transportation. It's an 80-20 split with the state. I'm told that it's taken so long because it's a complex project that involves city, state, and federal approval, as well as Audubon Institute and several neighborhood associations. Neighbors, just as of 2 weeks ago, were invited to make some comment on the 60% portion of the plans, but they had a very, very short time limit in which they could get in any of their plans. So the neighborhood organizations really ramped up efforts to say, we want this, we don't want that. Some people are saying, please, please, please don't put bike lanes in here because the streets are so narrow already. I have not been able to take a look at what the final plans are. It's a $4.5 million project. It's supposed to take about a year to complete. Once that part is complete, the part from East Drive to Nashville Avenue will get started. That's currently slated to be a $3 million project. The money's in place for both projects already, but they're talking about putting one of those box culverts in underneath Nashville Avenue, so that will up the cost of that project and make it take longer. So the bottom line is there should be work starting this year on Magazine Street between Leake and East Avenue, and I'm told that ingress and egress to the park, the zoo, and the Fly will maybe be changed but never stopped. During that whole time, you'll be able to access those three places.
Changed. Interesting.
It might not be in the same spot it is now. You might have to detour around. They had talked at one point about making the downtown end of the Fly, the access point to the Fly, and making it two-way. Right now it's a horseshoe that you go around from the uptown end to the downtown end. they talked about maybe making it a two-way at that downtown end to accommodate people. It won't be fun, but if you could drive faster than 15 and it doesn't feel like you're driving through Beirut, people might be happy about
It was
it.
interesting, the resistance to the bicycle lane. I know that's another issue. But it seems to me that's an issue of the future. That is, there's more and more bicycle lanes, and people are feeling squeezed by that driving. I think that's something that's going to be simmering.
I think you're right.
Okay, all righty. We'll be looking for it, Don. Thanks a lot. Back over to you and talking about traffic, but a different issue with traffic, and this is traffic cameras. And
This is traffic cameras.
Yeah.
The
So-
subject that everyone loves to
Yeah,
hate.
everyone really likes. So the IG, the Inspector General, came out with a report saying the city really needs to improve on all of this and really set up an agency, which the city now says they're going to do. But basically, there's over $700,000 that's owed to citizens.
There is, and it was so interesting to read the IG's report because all of the previous news that we've heard about the camera system and the problems with it had been limited to its very early days when it was overseen primarily by the Department of Public Works. And of course, that was ruled unconstitutional by a court, and the city was ordered to pay residents back $35 million. But since then, the department had jointly overseen it with NOPD. Police officers were supposed to be reviewing this footage to make sure that residents were being ticketed fairly. And what the OIG's report showed was that police officers, in a lot of cases, they spent only 3 or 4 seconds looking at what was supposed to be a 12-second video. They skimmed through it. They didn't give themselves enough time, if they looked at it at all. What it showed was that the department's vendor, which basically was responsible for monitoring the cameras and reporting back to the city when someone had violated, had sent a report that said, okay, we have people who, for whatever reason, overpaid. They may have paid by mail, and then they may have paid again online, for getting their original payment. We have about $700,000 of overpaid tickets here, and you need to refund this money. Well, no one in the city at City Hall was looking at those reports to know that the money needed to be refunded. And this was over a period of about 7 or 8 years that this has gone on. And it's really, many folks who read that report were really disheartened by it. The traffic camera program remains unpopular. Folks sort of see it as a money grab as opposed to a public safety tool. And the city has always pushed back on that by saying, no, this is really a tool designed to ensure that we have fewer crashes and really a tool designed to ensure that our streets are safe. But when you see, when you hear about NOPD officers not really reviewing the tape but just making a snap decision, it kind of raises questions about the integrity of the program.
Fewer school zone accidents? Was there a plethora of school zone accidents before?
Right.
Because the cameras are working in school zones now.
Well,
That was a
They
change
are.
that was
That was
made.
a change that the mayor made.
Here's what
Latoya
happens to me
Cantrell.
about school zones. A lot of times, because it's there for safety, why is only one side of the street the safe side with the camera,
Right.
and the other side there's nothing?
And also with the school zones, that was an issue that I know was in your. Was it in the
Exactly.
IG's report too?
It was in the
That
IG's report.
There are people being ticketed in school zones
When
where
school
there's
is
no
not
longer a
even
school.
in session.
Right. Or-
No, I know.
Because no one in the city, and the IG pointed this out as well, no one in the city was tracking. And in New Orleans, we have an interesting education system where we have a bunch of different independent charter schools. No one had reached out to those charter schools to find out,
What's your
okay,
school
what's your school
calendar?
calendar? Are you going to let out on the same day as this school is going to let out? It was actually operating off of an older calendar from about 10 years ago that the Orleans Parish School Board had. Well, the Orleans Parish School Board doesn't directly manage schools anymore. And so people were getting tickets on days that school was not in session.
Right.
And that's been a problem for years.
Or once again, with the school that didn't exist there anymore.
Exactly.
So this money is $700,000. What's happening with that?
The state, the city has said that it is going to escheat, I'm not quite sure how it's pronounced, the property to the state or even what it means, but we have learned that that means that the city is going to essentially turn over these payments to the state treasury office, the unclaimed property pool that exists and that citizens can apply to get their money back.
So they're making it
that.
really easy.
Yeah.
You're not just
you have
getting
to-
a check in the mail.
Exactly, no, you have to
definitely-
put in to receive this money.
All right.
And that's what's
Thanks a
going to
lot,
happen.
Jessica. And we're going to wrap up now with Errol. And significant anniversary today.
10 years ago tonight, the Saints won the Super Bowl. And it's hard to believe. I'm sure everybody has memories of it. One thought that comes to my mind is that game will be remembered for, I'm sure, one of the greatest plays in Super Bowl history, and that was at the beginning of the second half when the Saints had the kickoff. And this was in the locker room while the Saints are there. Sean Payton says, we're going to do an onside kick. Now, if you know, an onside kick has to go just barely 10 yards, has to go in the right place. It's a high-risk kick. and then you hope that your team is able to recover it. Most often, they don't. It doesn't work.
The rules have changed since then too.
So here it was. Sean Payton says it. He said that, and the story is that Thomas Morstead, who was the kicker, he finds out about this, and he's just really just torn up. I mean, his insides, because he's got to go before a national audience, do an almost impossible kick, and then the band that night was the Who, and the Who went long. Halftime lasted 35 minutes, and so Tom Morstead tells a story about just sitting in the locker room 35 minutes, knowing he had to go and do an onside kick. And he did it perfectly. And a guy named Jimmy Reeves recovered it, and the Saints got the ball. And this would have been forgotten about, except once the Saints got the ball, in a few plays, they got a touchdown, which put them ahead. And so it was an incredible moment, really.
It was a gamble. If it works, you're a genius. If not, you're
an
not.
idiot.
I remember when the Saints, a few weeks later, when they went to the White House, President Obama told Sean Payton, he says, "You're not going to make a lot of difficult decisions, but calling for that onside kick, that was really tough."
So 10 years ago tonight, and of course there was the interception too.
Yeah,
And pointing the way
Tracy
to
Porter's,
the- yeah,
Tracy
pointing the way
Porter's
to the Super- so
interception,
great.
and he
It was a great day and just a great night.
and he was a
Okay.
Louisiana guy too, so that added more to it.
And I was down in Miami doing coverage on that, and I wish I'd have been here because the celebration here was
It was
so
fantastic.
good.
Yeah, it was really, really
Yeah.
great. Okay, looking ahead.
A lot of crews are starting to take this whole greening very seriously, and the Rex organization this year is trying to develop an aluminum cup to throw. Now they'll still do plastic cups, but hoping that aluminum cup could eventually take the place of plastic cups. Also, they're working with this group, ARC, which deals with disabled citizens who collect beads, and any beads they've collected in the past that are Rex beads, they're buying back and throwing again as a way of redistributing. So it's a couple of efforts that are going in terms of green.
Jessica.
Speaking of Mardi Gras, you should see less plastic on the streets this year. The City Council recently passed a rule that bans crews from throwing plastic bags off of floats. So we'll see if that gets enforced.
Because that
and
would
how
be a
much.
good thing.
We'll
Done.
see.
Sometime before construction starts on Magazine Street and later in this spring, 2 new lion cubs will be on display at Audubon Zoo. That we
sweet.
talked about this species survival program. They have 2 new male lion cubs.
Oh, that's wonderful. Eric.
Tuesday morning on a 6:30 half hour on the Eyewitness Morning News, we'll be showing you a lesson on making Cuban cigars, rolling Cuban cigars. It was fascinating to watch it.
Speaking of which, did you bring any back?
I did.
Okay. And you
I
could.
gave them away because I don't smoke. Now the rum I kept.
Okay. All right, guys. Thanks a lot for being here, and thank you all for joining us. We'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.